What did you do last summer?
Greetings and salutations, guys. I'm here with my review of I Know What You Did Last Summer, the 2025 version, which is a legacy sequel slash requel, if you want to use the terminology from Scream 5, which was a movie also called Scream. I really hate this practice of calling outright sequels that are in the original continuity by just the same title again. I didn't like it when Halloween did it. I didn't like it when Scream did it. And I don't like it when I Know What You Did Last Summer did it. You gotta have your own title. I mean, if you're a straight up remake, go for it. Just use the same title again. But once you're a sequel, no. How do you differentiate these movies? I hate that when I say I want to watch Scream or Halloween, that there are multiple movies with a title that could be sequels to each other. It's a whole thing. Anyway, I Know What You Did Last Summer is a funny one because it's the third movie in the franchise, unless you count the straight-to-video sequel that not anyone really counts, but then it's the fourth one. But this one is going back to the beginning in a big way. This is sort of all in on the legacy sequel of it all. Back to Southport, the town from the original, and once again, a new group of characters going through a very familiar situation. Look, there's that thing where, especially with legacy sequels, where it's kind of a remake, it's just also a sequel. This is very much that, because you've got a new group of characters who on 4th of July in the same town have an accident that leaves someone dead and that they decide to cover up their involvement in. And wouldn't you know it, a year later, at the same time of year, 4th of July, there starts to be a body count. Someone is sending a note to them that they know what they did last summer. And there's someone in a fisherman's liquor carrying a hook, and that person is stalking and killing everyone involved and maybe a few other people along the way. I Know What You Did Last Summer is an interesting part of slasher movie history in that I enjoy the movie. I have nostalgic affection for the movie, but it's always been second tier at best when you look at the history of horror movies or slasher movies. It was made to capitalize on Scream in the first place. They had a screenplay sitting around written by Kevin Williamson, but it was an adaptation of a book that when Scream hit, they said, we have to have our own Scream style movie. And they made it right away. They made it quickly. They got a hot young cast to do it, but it always felt second string to me. I did see the movie in 1997. I saw it multiple times because that's how I roll if I kind of like something. But I always knew that it didn't have, that special something that Scream had. It was just a fun, semi-forgettable, slasher movie that had some enjoyable parts to it. And certainly it, has been memed with What Are You Waiting For and whatnot. But as a movie, it doesn't really stand out, except that it is of a very certain era with a very specific cast. But now, of course, we're nearly 30 years later, and, nostalgia can really dig in deep. And so we get this movie that it's very amusing to me how reverential it is to the original. Because I Know What You Did Last Summer is not Halloween. It's not Scream. It is not sort of seen as this classic where you have people that will typically reference it or think about all the sequences from it. But this movie acts like it is held in that high regard, but it does it in a pretty entertaining way. I was enjoying myself for most of this movie, even as I was kind of chuckling at the idea that, wow, this sure is going in on the idea that we should remember a lot about I Know What You Did Last Summer. I'm glad I rewatched it. I'd seen it a bunch back then, but I hadn't watched it in quite a while. I watched it this past week because there's so many callbacks. There are so many references. They, go to locations from the original. They have visual things that, make you think about it. There's just so many things that connect back to it in a way that usually, we sort of reserve for a different kind of movie. But here we have it for, something that already kind of felt like an imitation. So then it's extra funny that this movie is coming out after Scream 5 and 6. And it feels like that's why it exists again. Like Scream came back, so I Know What You Did Last Summer, it's time for that one to come back too. But I think that these filmmakers did a really good job with it. I think that director Jennifer Caton Robinson and her co-writer Sam Lansky, they knew how to make an entertaining movie here. I think it, has a good energy to it. It's actually a little more comical, I think, than the first two, because the first movie is not a Scream-esque meta comedy horror movie. Maybe they threw in a couple little things to kind of lean in towards that a bit more, but it still didn't really feel like that. This one is not feeling like it's copying Scream on that level. But I think that it's having a little more fun. There is a breeziness to it in the middle of it being a slasher serial killer movie. And I had some, legitimate laughs from it, from some of the things that they were doing without it turning into full horror comedy. I think it's just a little bit more of a tinge. And tonally, it really kind of rides a fine line that for much of it, I think it pulls off, which is on one hand, it's a little more overtly comedic. On the other hand, it's trying to get a little more deeper with the characters. Because the other thing I'll say, criticism of the original, is I think the characters are all pretty paper thin. And the only one who really pops in the first one is Helen, the character played by Sarah Michelle Gellar. But this group of characters I thought was much more likable, and they were much more sort of enjoyable to spend time with. And yeah, I really liked the lead in this movie, which is Ava, played by Chase Sweet Wonders, and her best friend Danica, played by Madeline Klein. I think Madeline Klein does a really good job of playing a character that's kind of the vain, sort of narcissistic one, but actually still make her likable. You still, are rooting for this girl, despite the fact that she can be a bit vapid. I always appreciate when someone can pull that off. Some of the supporting characters, too, I think, kind of pop here in some really fun ways. I especially liked Gabriette, who plays Tyler, a podcaster who comes to town. Here's the thing. There's so many echoes of recent requels or legacy sequels, specifically Scream 5 and Halloween 2018. There's everything about the sort of not only having a new group of characters, but how eventually they are going to kind of reach out to the big heroine survivor from the original, just like Scream 5 did. Well, that's going to happen here because Jennifer Love Hewitt is in this movie as Julie James. And so that echoes Scream. The fact that there's a larger role, because it takes a while to get to her, there's a larger role for Freddie Prinze Jr. returning his Ray from the first and second movie. Kind of feels like Dewey in Scream 5. And then the podcaster. That feels like Halloween 2018, which had a podcaster who was investigating, doing a story about the original murders. And the same thing happens here. And Julie is going through trauma, just like Laurie Strode was in that movie. So I don't know, there's something kind of funny about the fact that this series is almost leaning into the fact that, maybe it's almost acknowledgement that I Know What You Did Last Summer kind of always felt like an echo of something else, that it happens so much in this movie. And yet at the same time, it comes in sort of an entertaining package that you can have a good time with this movie. I think you can laugh along with it. It is feeling a little bit winky. When it comes to the legacy characters, Jennifer Love Hewitt isn't in a ton of this movie, but I did enjoy her presence here along with Freddie Prinze Jr. and kind of bringing that, aura of their 90s aura with them. They seem to be having a good time stepping back into this world. And they have a really good scene together near the midpoint of the movie. I don't think it's giving too much away to say their characters are not together when this movie begins anymore. Also shades of Scream 5. But that they have this one really nice scene where they kind of get to talk through not just sort of the history that they share, but also how they're both kind of reacting to what this new situation is and how best to advise this new group of characters. The movie acknowledges, hey, this is pretty similar to what we went through too. And I think that they have a nice back and forth where they get to kind of talk through a lot of that. On the kills side, I don't think there's anything here that's like amazing. There's one I thought kind of stood out because they're a little more vicious than the others. But I think that you feel that this killer is pretty brutal. This movie has really good sound design, so it definitely gets a lot out of the fact that this killer is sort of coming in really brutal and will just cut you over and over again. And when they're coming at you, I think you feel it in a nice visceral way. So most of this movie worked really well for me. I'd say that it starts to drag at a certain point. It, feels like maybe it dissipates a little, some of that energy. And then the conclusion is a mixed bag. There is some stuff that I thought felt just way too sort of Scream coded, and like it just felt like kind of a pale echo versus the entertaining echo I was talking about. But then it kind of redeems itself. It kind of got me back again. Although on the drive home, it was one of those things where the more I thought about the ending, it's easy to pull some strings apart there, and it kind of might all collapse a bit. I think I'm mixing my metaphors, but that's okay. I'm under the weather this week. I have a little bit of a cold. Apologize for that. But yeah, it's overall, I think it does deliver what anyone who's going to see a sort of nostalgic, uh, return to I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is such a specific thing. It manages to make you have a good time with that, even if, yeah, that third act, I think, is a little wonky, is not the strongest point of the movie. But yeah, I still had a good time with it. Is it better than the first movie? Because I want to say, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, which I also rewatched this week, is awful. And then the third one is even worse. So there's only been one movie that I think was decent in this series till now. Is this one better? In some regards, it might be. Like I said, I think the characters are stronger here. Maybe it's not quite as well constructed as the first one, which, isn't the most complicated story in the world, but I think does feel a little tighter than this because this one has a little bit of a third act, some problems as far as some things that are sort of stacked on top of each other. But I think it can hold its head high. And again, I don't think the bar is incredibly high on this series going in, but I think if you have affection for I Know What You Did Last Summer, this is a movie that you can kind of feel like delivers on the promise of coming back to this series after so long and treating it in the way it does, with maybe more respect than it needed to be treated with. But at the same time, I did enjoy the fact that they did. Yeah, they go real big on the fact that you would think that this movie is one of the most beloved horror movies of all time. But at a certain point, nostalgia, there's a line about nostalgia in the movie that feels certainly winking and maybe a little bit too trying to have their cake and eat it too. But I also understand what they're doing with that. So those are my thoughts on I Know What You Did Last Summer, part 3 or part 4. I don't know. I needed a subtitle. I understand that's a really good title, but it's a complicated title. And what do you call it as you continue to sequelize it? But they got to figure something out. And if they do another one, and I know they want to, they'll have to come up with a spin, unless it's I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, but I wouldn't put it past them. All right, guys, if you can like and subscribe, that'd be great. I'm going to go blow my nose. Thanks a lot. Take care.